Britain in the 1960s. Z cars on the telly, motorways spreading fast. 10 cars got the badge and the blue light. Number 2 never should have left the factory gates so soon. Subscribe, stick around to the end, and tell us which one shocked you most. Number 10, Ford Anglia 105e. The Anglia was never meant to chase anyone down a motorway, and that, in itself, became the entire problem. Adopted widely by smaller forces during the early 1960s as an affordable, easily maintained panda car for community beat work, its distinctive reverse-raked rear window and boxy styling made it instantly recognizable outside village shops and suburban streets across the country. Chief constables loved the price tag, the running costs, and the sheer availability of spare parts through Ford's enormous dealer network, and for gentle beat patrol duties, it did the job perfectly well. The trouble arrived the moment an Anglia was actually needed to do more than potter along a residential road. Its tiny 997 cubic centimeters, later 1,198 cubic centimeters, engine simply couldn't summon the pace to catch anything more determined than a bicycle, and officers who found themselves needing to respond quickly to a call several miles away often arrived embarrassingly late, engine straining, gearbox wound out, overtaken by ordinary family saloons on the same stretch of road. Would you have trusted a car this modest to actually catch a fleeing suspect on the open road? Most officers who drove one quietly admitted they wouldn't, and the Anglia's reputation within police circles settled somewhere between useful and faintly embarrassing. Radios and blue lights added extra weight the little four-cylinder engine was never really designed to carry, and officers soon learned to plan their routes around hills rather than through them wherever possible, aware that a fully loaded Anglia climbing a steep gradient could lose momentum alarmingly fast. Some divisions eventually restricted the model to daytime beat work entirely, quietly reassigning night patrol and emergency response duties to whatever faster car happened to be available, an unofficial admission that the little Ford, however affordable and however easy to service, simply wasn't built for the job its blue light suggested it could do. Number 9, Hillman Husky. Roots Group pitched the Husky hard to smaller, budget-conscious forces as a practical, estate-bodied alternative to the flashier saloons other manufacturers were offering, a sensible car that could carry equipment, transport an extra officer, and still return respectable fuel economy on a modest rural policing budget. Forces covering large, sparsely populated areas were drawn to its practicality, and on paper, at least, it looked like a genuinely sensible choice for exactly that kind of duty. In practice, the Husky's cramped cabin and weak four-cylinder engine struggled badly once loaded with radio equipment, a second officer, and whatever else a rural beat required on any given shift. Long, undulating country roads exposed just how little performance reserve the little estate actually had, leaving officers wheezing up modest hills at barely walking pace with a full load aboard. Have you ever sat in a car that felt genuinely overwhelmed by its own job description? Officers assigned a Husky for county patrol duties knew exactly that feeling, and complaints filtered back up through station sergeants faster than Root's sales team would have liked. Maintenance crews, too, grew frustrated with a cabin so tightly packaged that even routine servicing became fiddlier than it needed to be, and the estate's modest boot space, meant to carry equipment, was frequently eaten up entirely by radio gear before a single item of actual policing kit could be loaded aboard. Several rural forces persisted with the Husky for years simply because nothing else fit their budget quite so neatly, but few officers who drove one regularly ever described it as anything more than adequate. Number 8, Vauxhall Cresta PA. Vauxhall's Cresta arrived dripping in American-influenced style, complete with dramatic wraparound windscreens, chrome trim, and, on later models, genuine tail fins borrowed shamelessly from Detroit design trends of the previous decade. Several forces, keen to project a modern, confident image to the public, ordered Crestas in genuine numbers during the early 1960s, drawn by its imposing road presence and smooth six-cylinder power. Parked outside a station or idling at a road junction, it certainly looked the part of a modern, no-nonsense police cruiser. Underneath the chrome, though, sat a car genuinely unsuited to the demands of sustained pursuit and patrol work. Heavy fuel consumption strained already tight force budgets, while soft, wallowy suspension tuned more for American-style boulevard cruising than for British B-roads left officers fighting body roll through anything faster than a gentle bend. Rust, too, took hold quickly around the wheel arches and sills, accelerated by the salt used on winter roads and the sheer number of miles a patrol car covered in a single year. Would you have trusted a car this soft and this thirsty to hold its line through a genuine high-speed pursuit? Many officers who tried found themselves easing off well before the Cresta's chassis genuinely wanted them to. Fuel bills alone became a genuine talking point at more than one force budget meeting, with the Cresta's thirsty six-cylinder engine consuming noticeably more than rival saloons covering the very same patrol routes, and workshop staff grew accustomed to booking in rust repairs on cars that were, in some cases, barely 2 or 3 years old. What had looked like a bold, confident statement of intent on the showroom floor slowly revealed itself, mile after patrol mile, to be considerably more style than substance. Drivers also noted that the Cresta's column-mounted gear change, smooth enough for gentle boulevard cruising, felt vague and imprecise under the kind of rapid, decisive shifting a genuine pursuit demanded, costing officers precious seconds exactly when they could least afford to lose them. By the middle of the decade, several forces that had ordered Crestas with genuine enthusiasm were quietly relegating them to escort and ceremonial duties, where the car's imposing looks could still earn its keep without ever being asked to prove its pace. Number 7. Wolseley 16 of 60. The Wolseley badge carried real weight within British policing by the 1960s, built on years of genuine service and a reputation for solid, dependable engineering that officers trusted. The 16 of 60, sharing its Farina-styled bodyshell with several BMC stablemates, arrived with exactly that reputation behind it, and forces ordered it in reasonable numbers expecting a worthy, if modest, successor to the Mark's earlier, more capable models. Its upright, dignified styling and traditionally trimmed cabin certainly looked the part. The disappointment came down, quite simply, to power. A 1.6-liter engine, entirely adequate for a dignified family saloon, left the 1660 genuinely underpowered as a pursuit vehicle, struggling to keep pace with the increasingly capable performance cars that ordinary criminals themselves were beginning to drive. Forces that had ordered it expecting a genuine step up from earlier models instead found themselves quietly relegating many examples to administrative and liaison duties within just a couple of years, while faster rivals took over the genuine chase work. Have you ever watched a respected badge fail to live up to its own reputation? That was the 1660's quiet fate within more than one force's fleet. It wasn't that the 1660 was unpleasant to drive. Far from it. Officers generally praised its comfortable ride and its dignified, well-appointed cabin. The disappointment was simply one of expectation against reality. A badge that had once meant genuine pace within policing circles now attached to a car that spent most of its working life following the action rather than leading it. Fleet planners eventually learned to order the 1660 primarily for supervisory and area liaison roles instead, where its dignified presence still counted for something even as its performance no longer did. A quiet demotion that few officers who remembered the Wolseley name's earlier glory found easy to accept. Number 6. Humber Super Snipe. The Super Snipe offered genuine six-cylinder muscle and a commanding, imposing presence that several forces valued highly for motorway patrol and escort duties through the early part of the decade. Roomy, comfortable, and genuinely quick in a straight line, it built a loyal following among traffic officers who appreciated its long-legged cruising ability on Britain's newly opened motorway network. For a while, it looked like exactly the right car for exactly the right moment in British road policing. Then Roots Group's own internal troubles began catching up with the car itself. Heavy fuel consumption made it an increasingly expensive vehicle to run as fuel costs crept upward through the decade, and as Roots rationalized its range and eventually discontinued the Super Snipe altogether in 1967, forces that had built entire fleets around it found spare parts growing scarcer and repair bills climbing steadily higher with each passing year. Would you have wanted your force's entire motorway patrol capability resting on a model the manufacturer itself had quietly walked away from? Several forces found themselves in precisely that uncomfortable position, forced into an earlier, costlier replacement cycle than they'd ever budgeted for. Its sheer size, once a genuine selling point on wide, empty motorway stretches, became a liability of its own kind on the tighter roads many forces still had to patrol day to day, with officers finding the big Humber cumbersome to park, maneuver, and thread through narrower town center streets. Chief constables who'd invested heavily in Super Snipe fleets during the early years found themselves quietly explaining to budget committees why a car bought for its long-term value now needed replacing years ahead of schedule. Number 5. Riley 4 of 72. Sharing its underlying Farina bodyshell with the Wolseley 1660 and several other BMC models, The Riley 4 of 72 was pitched to forces as a slightly more refined, sportier alternative, complete with a traditional Riley grille and a reputation for spirited handling inherited from the Mark's earlier, genuinely well-regarded saloons. A handful of forces, drawn by that heritage and by a genuinely willing twin-carburetor engine, added it to their fleets expecting a worthy pursuit car with a bit more character than its badge-engineered siblings. Reality proved less forgiving than the badge suggested. The shared Farina bodyshell, already known throughout the BMC range for rusting prematurely around the sills, wings, and rear-wheel arches, aged particularly badly under the punishing mileage and constant use that police duty demanded, corroding faster than forces had any reasonable right to expect from a car sold on refinement and quality. Engines pushed hard during pursuit work also strained noticeably harder than their more modestly tuned siblings, leading to a steady stream of premature rebuilds. Have you ever bought into a badge's reputation only to watch the metal underneath let it down? More than one force quietly discovered exactly that with the 472s, and Riley's presence in British police fleets faded quickly as a result. Workshop sergeants tasked with keeping the fleet roadworthy grew wary of the model within a couple of years, aware that any 472 brought in for a routine service might just as easily reveal fresh corrosion somewhere along the sills or rear arches. Replacement panels grew harder to source as Riley's own standing within BMC diminished through the decade, and by the time the Mark disappeared from British showrooms altogether in 1969, most forces had already quietly moved their remaining pursuit budgets elsewhere. Number 4. Austin 1800 Land Crab. Austin's 1800, nicknamed the Land Crab almost immediately for its wide, sprawling stance, arrived with genuinely innovative front-wheel drive layout and sophisticated hydroelastic suspension that promised a smoother, more capable ride than almost anything else on the market. Several forces, keen to be seen embracing genuinely modern engineering, added the 1800 to their traffic fleets during the mid-1960s, expecting cutting-edge technology to translate directly into cutting-edge pursuit performance. On paper, and in a straight line on smooth tarmac, it genuinely impressed. In practice, officers trained for years on conventional rear-wheel drive saloons found the 1800's front-wheel drive handling characteristics genuinely unfamiliar under hard cornering, particularly in wet conditions where the car's torque steer could catch an inexperienced driver by surprise at exactly the wrong moment. The complex hydroelastic system, while comfortable, proved troublesome to maintain properly in busy police workshops that were far more accustomed to simpler, conventional suspension setups, and the heavy, cumbersome gear change drew persistent complaints from officers used to slicker, more direct alternatives. Would you have wanted to learn an entirely new driving technique in the middle of an actual pursuit? Several officers effectively had to, and more than one force quietly scaled back its 1800 orders as a result. Driving instructors within larger forces eventually developed dedicated familiarization sessions specifically for the 1800, an admission that the car's genuinely novel engineering demanded training most existing pursuit drivers simply hadn't received. Even once officers adapted, the car's wide, sprawling stance that had earned it the Land Crab nickname made it noticeably harder to place precisely on narrower country roads, exactly the kind of roads much of Britain's rural policing still relied on through the decade. Number 3. Ford Zephyr and Zodiac Mark III. Ford's Mark III Zephyr and Zodiac arrived in 1962 wearing dramatic, American-influenced styling complete with prominent tail fins and a wide, confident grille, and forces across the country ordered them in genuinely large numbers, drawn by Ford's reliable six-cylinder engines and an enormous, readily available parts network that made servicing straightforward even for the busiest station workshops. For sheer straight-line pace and motorway presence, the Mark III genuinely earned its reputation as one of the decade's more capable pursuit cars. The dramatic bodywork that made it so recognizable, however, came with a genuine cost. Those bold tail fins and expansive door panels rusted noticeably faster than officers or workshop mechanics had expected, particularly around the sills and rear-wheel arches, and early production quality control proved genuinely inconsistent, with panel gaps and trim fitment varying noticeably from car to car within the very same fleet delivery. Have you ever watched a genuinely capable car undermine its own reputation through nothing more than sloppy assembly? Forces that ran the Mark III hard, as intended, found themselves fighting a steady, frustrating battle against corrosion and trim complaints that no amount of straight-line performance could fully make up for. Interior trim, too, wore faster than expected under the punishing schedule of round-the-clock shift use, with seat fabric and door cards showing genuine wear within a year or two on the busiest cars, and workshop staff grumbled that replacement panels sourced through Ford's own supply chain didn't always match the factory fit quite as neatly as the originals had. None of it stopped the Mark III from doing its core job well when it mattered, but it left more than one fleet manager wishing Ford had matched the car's genuine pace with a little more care on the assembly line. Number 2. Austin Westminster A99 and A110. Austin pitched the Westminster hard to forces across the country in the early 1960s as exactly the modern, six-cylinder flagship British policing needed, a genuinely capable replacement for older, slower saloons that simply couldn't keep pace with Britain's fast-changing roads. Several major forces, under real pressure to modernize quickly and visibly, placed substantial orders almost as soon as the car reached showrooms, eager to get genuinely fast new pursuit cars onto the road before rivals or critics could accuse them of falling behind. On paper, with a genuinely willing six-cylinder engine and confident, imposing styling, it looked like exactly the answer forces had been waiting for. The trouble was that the Westminster reached those forces' fleets before Austin had genuinely finished sorting it out. Early production cars suffered from hydraulic braking servo problems that left pedal feel inconsistent and occasionally alarmingly soft under hard, repeated use, exactly the kind of use a pursuit car was guaranteed to face on a regular basis. Timing chain rattle plagued many early engines, panel fit and trim quality varied noticeably between individual cars rolling off the same rushed production line, and a steady stream of recalls and dealer bulletins followed the car through its first 18 months on the road, exactly the period when forces most needed it to simply work without complaint. Officers who'd been promised a genuine flagship instead found themselves filing fault reports and waiting on parts that workshops hadn't yet been properly stocked to supply. Would you have wanted your force's newest, most visible pursuit car to double as an unofficial test program for problems the manufacturer hadn't finished solving before launch? That's essentially what happened here. Austin, under commercial pressure to answer rival manufacturers' own fleet contracts, pushed the Westminster into full production and straight into police service well before its early teething troubles had genuinely been resolved, treating paying, uniformed customers as an unpaid extension of its own development program. Several forces that had ordered enthusiastically in year one quietly scaled back their follow-up orders once word of the persistent faults spread through internal fleet reports, and the Westminster's reputation within policing circles never fully recovered from those genuinely rushed early months, no matter how much better later, properly sorted examples eventually became. Now we're heading to the top spot, and you'll want to stay for this one, because it wasn't a mechanical failure or a rushed production line that ultimately let this next car down. Number 1. Jaguar Mark II 3.8. Few cars in British policing history earned the sheer, genuine respect that the Jaguar Mark II commanded from the moment it reached traffic divisions in the early 1960s. Its 3.8-liter straight-six delivered genuinely startling performance for the era, comfortably capable of running down almost anything a criminal might reasonably be driving, and its combination of leather, walnut, and genuine pace made it an instant favorite among officers fortunate enough to be assigned one. Forces that ran the Mark II built its reputation into something close to legend, a car that appeared regularly on television dramas precisely because it looked, and genuinely was, the fastest, most capable thing on British roads. And that, in the end, became exactly the problem. The Mark II's blistering performance and genuine desirability made it one of the most stolen cars in the entire country through the 1960s, a favorite target for professional thieves specifically because it was so fast and so valuable once resold or stripped for parts. Ensuring and maintaining a fleet of genuine performance saloons, each fitted with an expensive, thirsty six-cylinder engine and running on premium fuel at a punishing mileage, also proved considerably costlier than budgeting officers had originally anticipated when the enthusiastic early orders went in. Would you have guessed that a police force's own favorite pursuit car might eventually get quietly retired not because it failed, but because it succeeded too completely at being exactly what everyone wanted to steal? Force accountants, increasingly squeezed by tightening public budgets through the decade, began asking harder questions about whether a car this expensive to run and this attractive to criminals genuinely made sense for a growing fleet, even as officers on the ground continued to swear by its performance and its presence. One by one, several forces quietly began phasing the Mark II out earlier than they'd originally planned, replacing it with cheaper, less coveted alternatives long before the car itself had actually worn out or fallen behind on performance. It remains, even now, remembered as arguably the finest pursuit car 1960s British policing ever fielded, and yet it was ultimately let down not by its engineering, which never genuinely failed anyone, but by its own reputation, a car simply too good, too fast, and too desirable for the modest budgets meant to keep it on the road. These 10 cars tell a story considerably bigger than their individual service records alone. They reveal a British police service racing to keep pace with a country that was suddenly moving far faster than the institutions meant to police it, procuring fleets under real pressure, real budgets, and real public scrutiny, even when the cars themselves weren't always genuinely ready for the job being asked of them. Some failed through simple lack of power. Others failed through rushed, unfinished engineering pushed onto the road before it should have been. And one, remarkably, failed through nothing more than being loved, and wanted, a little too much by exactly the wrong people. Looking back across the whole decade, it's striking how rarely the failures came down to any single cause. A car could be fast enough and still rust through within a couple of winters. It could be reliable and still hopelessly underpowered the moment it actually mattered. It could even be genuinely excellent, as the Jaguar proved, and still end up quietly withdrawn for reasons that had nothing to do with how well it did its job. Chief constables, workshop sergeants, and the officers behind the wheel were all, in their own ways, learning the same hard lesson at the same time, that fitting a car with a blue light and a badge never automatically made it fit for the road it was sent out onto. Which of these 10 surprised you the most? Would you have trusted any of them to actually catch you? Let us know down in the comments below. We genuinely read every single one, and we try to answer as many as we possibly can. Until next time.